Hey berries, welcome to my Chrono Odyssey closed beta test review. The test that ended on the 23rd of June 2025. This review is going to be slightly different compared to some other content creators, I feel. I kind of wanted to split this up into like a proper review category. The categories I'm going to be talking about in this video are the story, graphics and sound, briefly touching on the UI, the combat, the gathering, performance, the scaling, so like the gear scaling and the power scaling as we were going through the beta. I've got a category here that says the MMO in MMORPG, and my final thoughts on the game and how I feel like the game is probably going to be outlooked in the next few months and for if it releases at the end of the year. So one of the things that drew me into Chrono Odyssey, is an MMO, of course, but it had kind of a bit more of a unique theme, a little bit darker themed. Honestly, kind of felt a little bit like Dark Souls themage. I'm not a Master Souls player. I've played through Elden Ring. I did enjoy playing Elden Ring. I haven't really played through Dark Souls, but I kind of like the idea of a darker theme setting compared to, the light and vibrant of something like World of Warcraft or Guild Wars 2. Getting into the game though, the story, and the grittiness and the story are vaguely interesting for like the first 10-15 minutes. Honestly, they take that story as a pull-in, and then it's just kind of like loosely used throughout the rest of at least the beta. You do get an item very early on which allows you to essentially rewind time, at least eventually. And then also it can help you repair our old artifacts. It allows you to summon your own kind of like little mini boss for a little bit of time. And also enables you to defy gravity and kind of like stun the ground. It's like very kind of like Zelda-esque. I feel like from from the Tears of the Kingdom, or from Tears of the Kingdom, where you can like stasis things, and it kind of feels like it has that sort of vibe to it. I feel like there is some potential in that kind of mechanic, so that's kind of like its unique selling point, is this kind of like chrono disc. But in terms of the grittiness, like when you kill like mobs, for example, like limbs do kind of come off, but overall it's like that's probably the most amount of gore. And I think in one of the time dungeons as well, there's like kind of like skulls and stuff. That it's really kind of loose in terms of like the gore and stuff and what I was kind of expecting. But slightly adrift there with the story. The story is basically you fight these bad guys. Essentially, these bad guys would win if you weren't able to have the help of this character that comes in and kind of saves you and rewinds time for a year. So you get sent back a year, and your job is basically to warn the people of what's to come. And actually quite early on, you rewind time on a big kind of like structure, and you kind of remove that from the world, and everyone's really happy about that. So that's kind of like what your character is trying to achieve. You seem pretty powerful at the start there, being able to rewind time on a fixed area. But then you don't really get to do that kind of sort of thing ever again, at least in the beta anyway. Which I thought was kind of a bit strange, giving you that much power that early on, and then not really ever getting to use that again. But in terms of story, so basically you go out in the world, you're trying to repair or upgrade this disc that they've given you by killing bosses. You get the materials off those bosses, and then you go back to the character that saved you into the Citadel, and you slowly get more improvements on your disc. Be interesting to see where the story potentially goes after that. The little bit of lore in that room in the Citadel is that there's like these little pillars around the room that indicate like some of the planets. There seems to be like 12 planets. Kind of reminds me a bit of Final Fantasy 14 in a way, how there's like multiple planets, and then there's potentially one planet that is like the alpha planet basically, and if that one were to fall, then all the other planets would fall. Not sure if that's the vibe that they're going here for here, but some of the other planets have lost to the battle to the enemy, the Void, whatever they're called. And it does seem like there is some indication that 1 or 2 of the planets are still surviving and fighting off. But that's all the real lore that we have to go off here early on. And I was quite disappointed in terms of if you're wanting an MMO for a story, then I feel like this probably isn't going to be the game that's going to fulfill that dark fantasy kind of story vibes. I mean, this is still potentially early zone stuff. So in terms of the gore and the theme of the area, we're still potentially in a very early area, and it might get more gory later on and stuff. But at the moment, we kind of mainly have lush green forests. There are 1 or 2 kind of weird futuristic buildings that have blood pouring out of them a little bit, but nothing really crazy or gory. It's much more vibrant and maybe even more bright than I was expecting it to be. So yeah, a little bit of a letdown on that kind of front, which kind of moves us into the whole kind of graphics and sound, the aesthetic of the game essentially. As you can probably tell from the game, if you've played New World already, it honestly is very similar to New World, almost scary similar. I feel like it would be an understatement to say that it's heavily influenced by New World. Just a bit brief of information for me in New World. I played that probably solidly for a month, thoroughly enjoyed it until the company kind of, let's just say, didn't really have an end game, and a lot of exploits and things were happening, and that drove off a lot of the player base. And then basically the game is it's not dead, but it's died off from the potential from what it could have been. Definitely felt like a game that was released too early. But yeah, the graphics in terms of that of New World are very, very similar. You even have some of the trees, which I'll go into the gathering section later on, are young tree and mature tree, which I'm pretty sure New World used. So there's been a lot of heavy inspiration for New World from both graphics and from a gameplay sense. Game doesn't look as good as in the trailers. I mean, what you're seeing right now on my screen, I mean, it looks decent right now. I think at the moment this is running at 60 FPS on a 4090. No, sorry, a 5080. It's on a 5080. Running at 60 FPS. There are issues in terms of DLSS not being enabled. I think in later footage, I have DLSS enabled via some weird downloads and scripts and things. I don't quite understand that kind of stuff, but I've enabled it via that, and I did notice an FPS increase from around about 50 to... It was running about 40 to 60 FPS generally, and then it went up probably gained about another 20 to 30 FPS. So the DLSS enabling did seem to make some difference. Some of the materials on the tree. So for example, this tree here is a red tree, and that's I think it was a tier 3 tree. So you can tell the variance in terms of okay, this is this quality, that's that quality. Identifying what gathering nodes are better than others was quite easy. So in that regard, it's quite easy to identify this is a red tree. Later on, there's a blue trees, which are even rarer, etc. I'm sure that theme will carry on throughout the game. I'm sure there'll be a purple tree, right? One of the graphic issues that didn't get fixed up with DLS, I don't know if we'll see it in this gameplay footage that I'm running. This is just me playing through the beta. Is rock formation. So I don't know if you can see it on the right there. So a lot of those rock formations, those weren't particularly too bad, but there are a lot of ones that actually kind of look like PlayStation 2 graphics. Very smudged out and worn. I hope that's kind of gets remedied and fixed as the game progresses. Yeah, as I said, lots of frame rate issues. I know for the majority of players that aren't running a £3,000 system is a big concern, and hopefully they can get those optimizations in early on. I think sound effects overall, moving into sound, the sound effects were okay, very generic, nothing particularly special there. When playing my ranger with the crossbows, it kind of got annoying after a while, hearing the same repeated sounds from the crossbows repeated over and over and over and over again. That's one of the main reasons why I'm not sharing the audio from this footage, is because I found it hard to talk over the crossbow bolts constantly going off in combat. But yeah, and also there was some weird funky sound effects as well, like I mean, there's stuff like this can be easily be changed, but I remember there was like flame traps in dungeons and they had like monster sound effects tied to them as well. So they weren't sounding like flames, they were sounding like the screeching of monsters, which was very odd and strange. The music in this game, it's kind of what you would kind of expect. I think some of the music was good, but a lot of it is repeated. There isn't enough music samples to really immerse you in properly because a lot of it gets used. So hoping they add in more music as the game goes on, because I feel like this kind of game is either a game where you're kind of immersing yourself in, you're relaxing and you're chilling, or you've got a YouTube video open on the side and you don't care. I think probably more people are probably, especially in gathering, are probably having a YouTube video up or a stream up on the side on their second monitor. But I would like to have the option of just being able to chill and just having more music sample tracks would be nice, and also more combat music as well. I think some of the combat music was quite good, but once again repeated. I actually got kind of excited near the end of the beta because I can't remember what instance it was, I randomly heard new battle music for the first time. I was like, oh wow, that actually sounds pretty good. But it was literally the only time I heard it, and it stood out a lot because the music does get repeated heavily and a lot. The voice acting in the game, there isn't much of it past the first 10, 15, 20 minutes. There are little bits of drabs here and there where there is voice acting. It's okay. It's nothing particularly special. I feel like if you're gonna have voice acting, and I think in today's age, I think this voice acting is almost necessary, especially in a game that is coming across like a AAA kind of quality kind of game. Needs voice acting a lot to help just, you know, increase the quality and the immersion feel of the game. And also people just, you know, generally don't like reading text, especially like when you're moving quests, you know, if you're moving around in your quest, just having the dialogue going through audio rather than having to stand still and just read through text and stuff. I think that kind of gameplay is much more fluid and nicer. Not necessarily so much as realistic, but it does help the flow of the game quite a bit. The UI of the game, I'm just going to touch on this, is overall is just okay. But one of the main issues I had with the UI is if you're taking damage, but it's like non-combat damage, your UI at the bottom doesn't show up. So you have to then like use a combat ability or use like your Chrono compass thing, whatever it's called, in order to bring up your health bar and things. There are definitely times where I was like nearly dead because in one of the dungeons I was taking non-combat damage. And I had no idea how low my health was, and I was like actually nearly dead, and there's like no screen flashing indication of like you're low on HP or anything like that, and I thought that was kind of a bit peculiar. As you can see, like when I'm mining here, like the UI just like collapses and disappears, which isn't a problem when you're gathering and stuff, but I feel like if you're taking any instance of damage, that should kind of like flag up there too. The combat in the game, let me see if I can fast forward into some actual combat, or we're just going to be gathering the whole time. The actual combat of the game, the first class I tried was Ranger, and I wasn't a massive fan of the bow. So the Ranger has a bow, a crossbow, and a sword. And the bow, I just didn't like using it at all. Like the right click was like a zoom in, and you flick through different arrow types. And at the start, I'm sure it's probably not that confusing, but for me initially playing it was pretty confusing. It was much easier just to go into the crossbow, not have to worry about different types of arrows. You know, you just press the button and you go in and you get to do stuff. So yeah, that was pretty. And I didn't like using the bow. The crossbow was good. The sword was okay, but I ended up finding myself just using the crossbow for the overwhelming majority of the time of the playthrough. There was a time I did try out the Berserker and the Warrior. I felt like melee wasn't that rewarding to do. The ranger damage was very, very, very high, and my survivability felt a lot higher than the melee classes just because of the nature of just being ranged. But I had so many maneuverability tools at my disposal that it was just easy to play, really. I didn't really die in any boss fight situation. It was quite rare that I died. So yeah, I felt like if I was playing melee, I probably would have died a lot more. But yeah, combat in that regard, I did enjoy the crossbows, but the melee I didn't really enjoy. I have heard that there are some people that haven't enjoyed the melee. Some people are complaining about the melee hitboxes not being particularly great. There's definitely a weird interaction with the crossbows where you can press middle mouse button to lock on to a target, but the lock on is awful. It kind of like the crosshead, if the monsters in front of you is moving across your screen like at a semi-fast speed, the crosshead doesn't follow on with the lock on. So all your bolts will miss basically. But then you also on your right click, your right click is basically a dodge maneuver, but also has a volley attack entwined with it. And even if you're pointing the cursor at the monster that you're facing and then doing the dodge in a particular direction, I found that the majority of the bolts coming out of that dodge would miss unless I was using the lock on. So it's very peculiar in terms of like being able, the hitbox issues were there in terms of like whether I needed to lock onto a target to get the extra damage off, and the majority of the time I didn't want to be locked onto the target because the bolts would miss the majority of the time. Movements, I think like the movement overall is fine. There is a double jump. The double jump wasn't particularly useful until I hit a dungeon called the Leap of Faith, and that dungeon made me want to do a Leap of Faith IRL. I'll probably have a video on this channel of that dungeon at some point very soon. That dungeon was a nightmare, but because like some of these puzzle dungeons with movement feel atrocious. There's at times where it feels like you need movement speed on your gear to be able to complete it. And at the same time, having movement speed is also a detriment, because if you go as your movement speed boosts kick in, you start gliding across the ground in really strange ways. And there's definitely been some movement glitches where I've managed to leap way further than I should be able to, because of the weird jank physics sometimes that are happening with the movement speed interaction and how your character is kind of like arching over and flying through. So I don't know if that will get fixed. Honestly, the movement is seemingly like quite a hard thing to fix, and almost feels like maybe everyone's moving too fast anyway in general. But the dungeons really kind of showcase how bad the precision in terms of precise movements the movement actually is. When you're out on the world, and I didn't really pay attention to it, but doing dungeons where you have to land on specific spots, and you have to do it relatively quickly as well, because the terrain falls under you as well, so you can't, dilly-dally about it. You got to kind of like move as well. So movement is actually a big issue in the game, which I have heard that they're fixing, so we'll see about that. Moving into dungeons, as we were just briefly mentioned, I felt like there are these dungeons called time. I can't remember exactly what they're called. The times. They're basically these time zones, and you can do them solo or with a group of people. And there's 4 time devices in a dungeon. I did 2 of these, and they were basically the same in terms of you go to a time device, and then 4 monsters around it will become active. You kill those, and you do that 4 times. But it's actually, honestly, it sounds crazy, but the area is quite small. But finding all 4 time devices has been a pain on multiple locations, because the spawn locations aren't the same, which is nice in a way, but there's no easy indicator to find where they are in the small enclosure, and it has been an absolute chore at times in terms of finding like the last time device. And then once you've done that, it unlocks a boss, and you get a chest at the end. I think I do have some footage of that somewhere. I think this is me running one of these at some point. Yeah, here we go. So this is one of the first kind of like the time portals that you come across very early on. And there's like the 4 time devices that are like dotted around. The monsters here actually gave a good amount of cash. But you got these visions of the past that only come alive when you activate these time devices. But this was repeated again, the exact same mechanics of this dungeon where the time portal was in another time portal that I did across to basically the other side of the area that we had unlocked in the beta. I think there was one other time portal, I think, that was active, but if all the time portals are going to be like this, then it's going to be pretty dull. And there were definitely lots of repeated, like, open world scenarios. So I don't know if you know, like, from Guild Wars 2, for example, you've got, like, those events that can randomly occur when you're moving in a certain area. It'd be something like, oh, there's this NPC that needs help and you're going to go help them. Though the two events that I saw was a caravan where you had to kill 3 monsters to then get the chest to unlock, or there was 4 monsters around a priest, around a fire wooden pillar thing. Those were like the only 2 events that were around in the large area that we had of the beta. So that got kind of dull pretty quickly, and also the rewards for doing it felt kind of weak too. There were some minor interesting side quests. There was an interesting side quest where you had to like save a guy falling from a waterfall. You had to go get his clothes, and then you come across him later on, and then he's captured in a cage. All that kind of stuff was kind of interesting. So some of the side quest stuff, I actually found some of the side quest stuff. Actually, that side quest was more interesting than any other part of story in the game. Like helping that guy cross the river and all that kind of stuff was kind of funny. That was the best bit of story that was in the entire game. So yeah, I'm not sure how overall I feel about that. I think some of the last things I want to talk about is like the AI in this game, and you kind of really get to feel that the AI is really stupid when you're playing ranged. I feel like if you're playing melee, I think a lot of the fights are probably quite brutal, but playing ranged, like these mobs here do nothing if you're ranged. I would say the majority of mobs don't really do anything if you're ranged. There aren't really many ranged mobs in the whole game too. I think in this pack here, I think there's one wizard that can fire like the occasional lightning bolt, but like actually coming across ranged monsters in this game, this orb thing was weird too, because you can like, I thought you could dodge through it to detonate it, but I guess you just have to like run away from it. There's nothing you really can do about that. Yeah, there wasn't really like that many ranged monsters. I think that was like the only mage that I saw really. I think maybe the priest in the event was also like a mage-esque type as well. And I think the 1 or 2 of the skeletons had ranged weapons, but like enemies having ranged weapons seemed extremely rare. So yeah, there didn't really seem to be much downside of playing a ranger. Apart from, actually there was one mob that seemed quite scary, but because I kind of scaled it, which I'll talk about scaling coming up soon. There was like this flying beetle that kind of charges at you. That was probably the scariest thing. Like a flying mosquito was probably the thing that gave me the biggest jump in the whole game, which is kind of daft considering there's lots of scary mobs in the game and I'm worried about a mosquito. So yeah, it was, they need to do a lot of AI tweaking and balancing and things like that, but we'll talk about the balancing very shortly. Before we go into that, I want to talk about the Gathering. The Gathering is identical to New World. I enjoyed the Gathering in New World too. There really is, if you've played New World Gathering, there really isn't much. You've already know what this Gathering is going to be like in Chrono Odyssey. It is virtually 1-to-1 in that regard. Basically no difference. As you're leveling up, it takes a huge amount of time to gather the same sort of materials. It seems like you can gather any material though. I think in New World you had to be a certain level in like logging in order to be able to cut down a particular tree. In Chrono Odyssey, it feels like there is no limit, but it just takes forever to cut down that tree, which is nice, I guess. And the more levels that you get into like logging, for example, gives you more logging mastery. Upgrading your tools also gives you more mastery, and plus also like the higher level tools starts giving you extra perks, like you get more life XP, or you get more luck when you're gathering, or potentially more yield, like things like that. But the gathering time was still particularly slow, even if you had like a high tier tool and using it on, like, say you had a tier 2 tool and using it on a tier 1 kind of node, it still took quite a long time in order to progress through that. and you've got like the usual stuff. You've got like the logging, you've got butchering, you've got gathering, you've got fishing. Fishing is a bit of a peculiar one as well. It's kind of the fishing in this game. If you're I like fishing in video games, and I feel like this is probably one of the most basic kind of fishings. You just very strangely you throw out the bait, but like you throw it even on max distance. You basically throw it like 30 centimeters in front of you. Your character is like has the weakest throw stat in the entire world. And then the bait just, you know, it bobs up and down, and then it says click, and you click, and then you do nothing, and then you then get the fish. It's very kind of inactive kind of fishing. I think it should have been a little bit more proactive. I mean, I've been playing Guild Wars 2 recently, and even the fishing in that is a bit more proactive. So a bit disappointed in that regard. There is fishing mastery. I think fishing mastery does increase the reel-in speed of the fish. There was an interesting quest as well where you fish up like a treasure key. So there was like a quest use of the treasure key. But yeah, so yeah, fishing is in the game. But is it any good? Not really. I think like they could do a lot more with that, honestly, to make that more interesting. In terms of like crafting and things like that, it wasn't very clear also on what I was getting from leveling up my professions. It seems like some recipes were locked based on like, for us, or some alchemy recipes where I need to be like level 7 alchemy or something in order to be able to unlock that recipe. But there didn't seem to be, from what I could tell, much benefit in terms of leveling up those crafting skills. I'm assuming I couldn't test it enough to provide evidence otherwise, but I'm assuming the equipment score goes up based on the level of your crafting and potentially like higher quality. I'm assuming the game doesn't tell you anything, so it's one of those things where it's just like you kind of just have to find out from other people or from yourself or testing. But it wasn't super obvious in terms of like getting upgrades or percent chances of upgrades or things like that. So there did seem to be like a little mention on the crafting things about how there were kind of like lucky chance procs and things like that, but I don't think I received any when doing any crafting. When I crafted my own gear, I didn't seem to notice anything different there. So a bit worrying about that kind of system. As I said, I didn't get to test it enough in terms of the actual crafting, but it would have been nice to have some indication of like, you know, what I'm receiving in return for spending my time in the game on this one particular thing. I feel like I shouldn't need to go on like YouTube or Google in order to find that information out. One thing I will say though, that the town had a warehouse, which I think also is the thing that the bank is called in New World. But the town had a warehouse, and you could just dump all your materials there, and then whenever you used any of the crafting stations, it did pull from the warehouse. So I thought that was a really nice convenient issue. It meant that I didn't have to. There is weight limit in this game, but it wasn't too bad in terms of you know, I could just dump everything in the warehouse, and then I'll be back to the weight limit. The things that seemed to weigh the most was actually like actual pieces of gear, and you can salvage them, but the salvaging didn't seem particularly great, to be honest. The amount of resources you got from salvaging didn't seem to be super fantastic. So we'll see if that improves. Also, in order to salvage, you have to like fully repair your gear, which can take durability damage if you die or if you just use it. But going back into combat, like here, for example, is where like when you see how like the grass blocks my camera view as I'm shooting the target, because the target is slightly elevated, and I've got grass in my face. And then there were many situations actually where, because I was in lower elevation than the target, half my screen was just grass for like probably about 30 seconds. I'm not sure what they can do about that, but I found that kind of gameplay quite annoying. I mean, I guess I could probably turn down foliage settings if there was a foliage setting. But yeah, I found that kind of a little bit frustrating. Not too severe here in this fight here, I don't think, but yeah, just you can kind of see it here. Yeah. But it was like that for a lot in some of the fights. So you're just looking at grass. A bit annoying. Anyway, bit off topic there. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to cover in terms of gathering. Very, very New World-esque. Didn't seem to be like that many like rare material procs from gathering. Didn't really. I mean, it's early days and it's like early gathering materials, but there wasn't really anything to kind of like, oh, I got this, you know, rare material from gathering mushrooms or something like that. It was just bog standard. You're just getting mushrooms and mushroom spores, basically. Nothing too crazy. Oh, one thing I will say though, I did notice that there were some accessories that I got that had, like, for example, if you did a life skill for the next 30 seconds, you get like double yield on logging. So I can imagine that endgame gathering will probably revolve in, okay, I've got this logging set, I've got this butchering set, I've got, you know, yada yada yada. So you're gonna have that lots of different sets with lots of different life skills. I'm not fully sure how I feel about that. I don't like having to keep multiple sets of gear for multiple sets of things, especially when it's like life skinning as well. I feel like when I'm doing life skinning, I'm not going out just to get one material. I'm going out to get, like, you know, 2 or 3 materials at the same time, and having to constantly shift through gear sets just to go, like, you know, oh, there's a tree I want there, but I want that node over there. Then I'm gonna need to, you know, I'm going to equip my logging gear for that one tree there, and then I'm going to take everything off and then put my mining gear on for that one node over there. I hate that, and I hope they, even if they make it so, like, for example, 100% yield from logging, they put it down to like 25% yield for like all life skills. I think that would be just better in my opinion, or an easy way to gear switch, because I don't think there's any like set gear, so you can easily flick through different sets of gear. I don't think that's in the game. I really can't be bothered just to switch through, like, you know, unequip and re-equipping 6 different types of gear every time I'm hitting a different node. I think we briefly hit on performance. That was going to be the next category I was going to go on. But just for the sake of timestamping, yeah, the performance definitely was an issue. I did use a DLSS unlock script in order to get more FPS at the end of my playthrough. I did notice like a 20 to 30 FPS increase when doing that. In terms of latency, the latency for me was fine. I think in here I'm seeing 61 ping, which is higher than I would like to see when connected to EU. I think this was on EU01 server. I think 60 ping is fine. I would prefer it down to be like when I'm playing stuff like League of Legends, for example. I go down to around about 10 to 15 ms. I think 20 in a competitive game is fine. I think 60 ms might be pushing it though for PvP potentially in a game like this though. I can imagine latency kicking in and being an issue at 60 ms. For PvE, I think it's fine. For PvP, that might become an issue. I got to do one instance of PvP in this game. Someone was flagged for PvP. I just attacked them and then won, and there didn't seem to be a reward for doing that. I was then flagged for PvP myself for attacking someone that was PvP flagged. So I had to go back to town and turn it off. So yeah. But yeah, MS could potentially be a problem in later down the line in PvP. But you know, these are beta servers, so I'm sure they have better servers for when the release comes, right? Going into scaling now, I had massive issues with scaling. I think the scaling at the very, very start of the game was actually quite good. I felt like, you know, the fights were reasonably challenging. I think for the first 5-6 levels, I think everything was fine, and then I felt like after that, it felt like things were kind of, I was getting ahead of the power curve. And then definitely by the time I hit level 15, because I was getting like level 15 drops when I was killing mobs at like level 6 and level 7, and I didn't understand like why. Like, these mobs are reasonably easy to kill at level, you know, level 5, level 6, and they're dropping level 15 gear, and I'm like, okay, well, the first time I saw it, it's like, oh wow, cool. Maybe that's like a rare drop, you know, for, you know. But then, you know, it takes a long time to get from like level 6 to level 15. And obviously I had more drops since then. So by the time I hit level 15, I had all this gear to equip. And then I was just like, I was blowing everything up ridiculously fast. I could solo pretty much any world boss out in the open, at least with the crossbows. Yeah, there's a massive gear scaling issue where I think that the characters just, at least crossbows, just get way too strong, way too early. I'm not sure what it's like for melee. I feel for the melee if it's tough because they're the ones having to get up and close and risk taking a lot of the hits. But yeah, I felt like, for at least from my gameplay, things were just dying way too easily, and it didn't seem to be much of a challenge, especially when the feel of the game in the trailers kind of made it feel like it was going to be more like a little bit like a Dark Souls MMO in a way. I didn't really feel like, I got to the point where I just gave up dodging because things were just dying at my feet. There was, like, obviously as there's more content and stuff, I'll find harder stuff, but I just hope that the scaling doesn't fall off, because the combat got to a point where it got kind of boring. I think some of the world bosses were like kind of fun to solo in some ways, but just killing, like, you know, normal mobs or going into the dungeons to kill those, it got very boring because they weren't a challenge, remote challenge at all. It was just killing like grey trash packs, it felt like. And it brings me to, like, you know, one of my more final points of like the MMO and MMORPG. So my MMO history is like playing like World of Warcraft, raid leading, owning a guild. This was like 15 years ago. So I was very much like hardcore with you know, lots of people being around, and then, you know, as I've had a kid, married and stuff, I have less time to play MMOs. I've gone more into drifting more into like I want to say casual, but it's still not casual. It's like that intermediate mode of like between casual and kind of hardcore. And yeah, I felt like, yes, there's players around in the world, and that was quite nice to see. You know, you see people around in the town and all that kind of stuff. But there wasn't really any reason to directly interact with people. It kind of felt in that regard of like Guild Wars 2, where there are people around, but there's no reason to have people. It almost felt like. Although in this scenario here, I think someone reses me, which is quite nice to have someone come along and res me. I think someone reses me here. But yeah, the actual dungeons themselves, like, because of the scaling issue, because they were so easy, I did the dungeon, I think it said like scales with recommended 1 to 3 people. And I was at the recommended item level. But I could have soloed that thing like super easily. Like, it was no point having other people there. I know, once again, this is very early on in the game, but I hope that there are more interactions with other players in terms of like those instances. I think I kill myself here, don't I? This is quite funny. As I like lunge in with the barrel, throwing it at the dragon. Yeah, there wasn't really that many instances of like having to really play around with people. And in some cases, it was just annoying playing with people because there are these things called bounties in the world. So there's a bounty board in the town. It tells you roughly the location of a target, puts a massive circle on the map, and you go into that circle to try and hunt down this target. But the bounties have a really long respawn timer, and there's no indication to know, like, you know, if it's been recently killed or not at all. So you could be looping around in the same area for minutes and not see it because it's still on the respawn timer, but you wouldn't know that it was on the respawn timer. And that was quite frustrating. So you would have to basically, you know, type the guy's name in Google, find out where exactly his spawn location is, and just wait in that area for it to spawn. And that kind of gave me like the annoying grievances of like games that came out like 20 years ago that had that. I think like now like World of Warcraft and stuff have fixed that by upping the respawn time of like name monsters like that I needed for quests. I feel like that's probably needed for this, or like add like multiple. The other way they could do it is add like multiple of the same kind of named target in the area, which is a bit like immersion ruin in a way, but like a little bit better in terms of like hunting down the bounty target yourself and increases your chance of finding the bounty target that you need. And also, like, players can just kill the bounty target even if they haven't got the bounty target, bounty quest. So random players that don't know about this feature would just kill the target. I mean, I definitely killed a bounty target without knowing what the bounty system was, and that then would put it on a respawn timer and then waste everyone else's time. And then they'll be searching in a massive circle around for this guy. So that, in terms of like the MMO part of it, was actually annoying more than anything. I think also some slight criticism in terms of character customization also has kind of risen up in recent like Reddit threads and things like that. I'm not fully sure how I feel about it. I completely understand both sides of the story. So you can make these characters that are like ridiculously absurd, like green aliens, massive bulging heads, very thin limbs, and long, and kind of look like, I think here, for example, I kill a bounty target, by the way, without having a bounty. I just didn't know about the mechanic. And people are complaining, yeah, it's ruining their immersion. I get that 100%. On the other side of it, though, it is bloody hilarious seeing some characters that are absurd. In the game, also, you have mimic chests, which is a little bit of a spoiler, maybe, but like they are based off like really jank. You can tell they're based off the character customization with huge, like jank, kind of like human models with a chest on their head. So there are like kind of like some weird jankness there, in terms of already being in the game. I think if they got rid of the color palette, like if you could make your character green and orange or whatever, and like I think leaving the rest in is absolutely fine. I think being able to make your character bright blue, bright green, making yourself the spotlight of everything, I think is potentially a little bit too much. But I think like leaving like the wonkiness with the limbs or whatever, I think that's fine. Because then they're not like a shining spotlight beacon on your monitor that person is there looking for attention. But I get it from both sides. I don't honestly really care that too much whether it stays in the game or not. But I completely understand, like, you know, at the same time people want to have fun playing the characters, and at the same time people want to be immersed in the game, and kind of like medieval magic-esque kind of feeling to it does get ruined potentially when you see a giant pink big head alien with short limbs. I think overall my conclusion of the game, though, I actually, although it may be seeming a little bit harsh in my criticism, I did kind of enjoy playing my 20 or odd hours through the beta. I think there were a couple of crashes here and there. I think the servers overall, at least for me, stood up quite well. There's a couple of bugs here and there, but I'm not going to hold it against that for like a beta. The minor bugs aren't really something I really cared to comment about too much. But it also reminds me of New World, and honestly, the disaster of what New World was. I really enjoyed playing New World. I really enjoyed the gathering system, and then the people behind New World, they let too many exploits come through, and they didn't resolve those exploits either. And that kind of like ruined the game for me. And I got to like end game, and then the end game was already getting pretty dull at that point. I think like the gameplay loop is very, very similar to how I remember early days of New World. I've not played New World since, honestly, the first couple of months of playing New World. I could see this game being the exact same thing as well, where people play for a couple of months and then just completely stop. It depends on how much variance there is in the game, how much reason there is for players to go in and explore. Yeah, like I can see, you could probably get like 50 to 100 hours into it and then kind of just stop. I think here, by the way, I try and access like some area off the map, and I do manage to get up on it, and it's like completely unfinished, like beta-esque in a way. Like, it's a bit weird how they left us in the beta and didn't lock off this bit off a bit earlier, because I managed to get up quite easily, I think, here. But there's a whole weird jank bit near the starting area. So very close to the starting area. I don't know why they left it like this. Which also kind of shows like how the quality of the beta kind of was. You can also see like the lighting flickering like crazy on this part of the zone because they weren't expecting anyone to go up here. But yeah, this game has like potential. Will it be ready though? At least from what we've played right in this beta, like will it be ready at the end of the year? I think if they release it at the end of the year, you're just gonna have another New World situation, I think, where people will just play it, get hyped onto it, then get bored after 2 months, and then that'll be it. I think you probably have like a few, you know, the 1-2% of people sticking on and with it, but we haven't really had any information on endgame, or any taste of endgame, or any PvP, PvE endgame. Yeah, it's like it's such a big unknown what the game is going to be like at endgame state, how the economy is going to play out, how the crafting system is going to play out like endgame. Is crafting going to be really important? Is crafting, especially in a game like this where they emphasize so much on like, you know, you're having to craft all these big materials and things like that, like how relevant is crafting going to be if like mobs end up just dropping, like basic mobs end up dropping the same thing, then it's just easily all that crafting, all that gathering that you've been building up to has completely just been put down the drain. So I mean, in terms of balancing, I know it's the beta, I'm not impressed with the balancing right now. And if the balancing heads into this direction into late game, then that is one of my main concerns of how they're going to balance gathering and crafting items into killing monsters and getting items that way through systems. So how long is it going to take to get, you know, the items through gathering? How rewarding is that going to be? Is it worth cutting down trees for 1,000 hours? It's impossible to know at this stage. Only the people that, you know, push on and grind through really on release for the first couple of months will get to find out what that's about. So yeah, those are like the main concerns. But as I said, like if they fix like the optimization, if they fix, you know, the balancing, if they make it a bit more gory, especially in like later areas, and if they make it a bit more dark and maybe a bit more challenging in terms of combat, they add some more immersion things like music and sound effects. I know I'm not running down like the list in terms of like, you know, they changed the whole game, but I felt like the bare bones are there. Some of the solo dungeons were quite fun. I quite enjoyed doing the trial. There was a trial in the north that was a little bit jank, but also kind of fun at the same time. Like I could see what they're trying to do with that. Like a lot of the solo content, the solo dungeon content seemed quite good. The party dungeon content seemed kind of meh though. So I don't know. I honestly feel like at the moment, like if I paid £30 to get maybe like 100 hours of gameplay and then stop, I think I would be reasonably happy with that, maybe. But that's not what MMO players want, is it? When you're buying an MMO, you're hoping to get potentially 1,000 hours, 5,000 hours out of an MMORPG. You're hoping it's going to take over your life and be your main game, right? So I feel like if you're going into it in terms of like, if you're buying a single player game but there's other people around and taking a slightly slower approach to it, I think you can probably get some enjoyment out of this game. That this is my expectation for when it releases. But expecting this game to potentially be like something that it takes over your life in terms of like, you know, World of Warcraft or, you know, Final Fantasy or something like that, where it's just like, you know, I don't see that happening with this. But I'd be happy to be proved otherwise. But I think you could probably get, as I said, a good chunk of time out of your time, out of money, out of your time out of your money. I don't know. I'm not ending on a little bit of a ramble here, but yeah, I think on conclusion, I think it's going to be more like treat it as like a single player game. Honestly, there's other people around, and then don't get too fixated on the MMO actually part of the game. Anyway, that's my thoughts. I'm going to be uploading some like little guide videos here for the bounty targets and a couple of the labyrinths and things like that onto the Bizzleberry 2 channel to help people if they are playing the game. I'll be playing in the next closed beta test to see if they change anything, and I probably will play on release. So yeah, I'll be happy to update my thoughts. And oh, is this what I think it is? Yeah, I think it is. Yep. Good timing to end the video on. Yeah, one of his mimics. It actually did jump scare me the first time. So yeah, they're really easy to kill though. Especially the ones that I saw like later on, they died ridiculously fast. They give you a little jump scare at the start, but they are very easy to kill. And you don't really get much reward for killing them either. The gold reward that you get from them is actually really, really bad. So I hope that actually gets increased, but yeah. Yeah, all the best guys, take care. Hope you guys enjoyed my little overview of Chrono. And yeah, see you for another one. Bye bye.